Hi, Melissa.
Hi, John.
So I was planning to share my screen. Okay.
We'll give it 1 minute, John. For all of our participants that are still joining, we have about 1 more minute before we'll get started. So if you can just be patient, we'll let others join as we have a number who have registered for this webinar today. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's about 12:01, and we want to remain timely here. We'd like to welcome everyone to our first February webinar for Kelly Cawthorn. This webinar we are co-hosting with one of our clients, ACEC of Michigan. We are excited to co-host and have our moderator, Troy Hagan, the Deputy Director of ACEC Michigan, join us to help us bring From Panic to Power, crisis communication that wins today. We're looking forward to hearing from John Selleck of Harbor Strategic Public Affairs. And I am going to turn it over to Troy to bring this exciting webinar, and one that I know we all could use from time to time, and hopefully maybe never have to use, actually. Right, John? All right, Troy, take it away.
Thank you, Melissa, for that kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Troy Hagan, Deputy Director of the American Council of Engineering Companies of Michigan, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator for today's webinar. At ACEC Michigan, we are committed to providing our members with valuable resources to help them navigate the evolving political, regulatory, and business landscape. That's why we're especially excited to co-sponsor today's session, From Panic to Power, Crisis Communication that Wins. In today's fast-paced world, crisis situations can arise at any moment, and how we respond can make all the difference. Whether you're leading an engineering firm, managing client relationships, or engaging with the public, effective crisis communication is a must-have skill. We are honored to have John Selleck, founder and CEO of Harbor Strategic Public Affairs, is our expert presenter today. With decades of experience advising state leaders, campaigns, and organizations, John has a wealth of knowledge in strategic messaging, media relations, and crisis management. His insights will help us turn high-pressure situations into opportunities for clarity and leadership. Before we begin, a few quick housekeeping items. This session will run for approximately 1 hour, including time for Q&A at the end. For ACEC Michigan members, participation in today's webinar qualifies for 1 continuing education credit. The information on how to obtain that credit will be displayed at the end of John's PowerPoint. If you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A function, and we'll address as many as possible during the Q&A. With that, let's dive in. Please join me in welcoming John Selleck.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Happy post Super Bowl Sunday. I hope that you got your free Starbucks today they're handing out. If you stayed up late for the game, I know I did. And we can even learn some lessons from what happened in the game last night for what happens here with us. First, I just want to note, my grandfather, my favorite, was engineering, went to Michigan Tech back when it was called the Michigan Mining and Technical College or something. I have his degree. It's like 100 years old. I think if he found out I just talked for a living, he'd be a little disappointed in me. So I'm honored to be with you today. Hopefully he'll appreciate that I remembered him on this moment. I'm going to share my screen right now. Can you see that, Troy and Melissa? Great. But I do talk for a living, and so I'm going to be here today to talk about crisis communications. It's a really complicated field, and the simplest thing I could tell you all today is if you get one of these phone calls, you're screwed. But it's a little more complicated than that, and quite often, even after a little bit of pain, you can find a way to work your way around it. And the big picture you'll hear from me today is planning. And if engineers did anything, we know they plan. We know we got a lot of other people on this call. Planning is important. Working through this and building your quote unquote crisis muscle inside your own organization is important as well. I worked for a lot of statewide politicians. Shockingly, they tended to get into trouble with things, whether they either had a problem with policy or their personal life or whatever. It used to give me a lot of anxiety. And then because I did it so much and it was so like high energy, it came to enjoy it. And that's an illness. I don't want you to enjoy it, but I do want you to know that preparing for it is really important. And in the day and age here we are in 2025, if you just, turn on your phone at any given moment and look at Twitter or whatever news source you like to look at, it's chaos and it's going to just keep spinning faster. So you don't really have an option other than to get this to be part of your organization. And why do we do it? It's because we're protecting your reputation. Again, that might indicate my political background of having worked for politicians whose reputations is important so they can keep getting elected, but so is your reputation. I mean, all the other assets that you have on your financial spreadsheet, your human talent, the great things that you do in your communities, all those great things will just be shredded and turned into nothing, sometimes in a matter of days, simply because of one thing, whether it was true or it was an accident, things happen. But your reputation is the most important thing you have. And so I like to always tell people that failing to prepare is preparing to fail. A smarter guy than me, Warren Buffett, had a nice one I like, that it takes 20 years to build a reputation. And for all of us, I'm a small business person in this part of my life. It takes a long time to build that reputation, and it only takes 20 minutes to ruin it. Warren Buffett said that. He is a financial guy, but he was correct on that front. I actually had to look and see. I knew I didn't invent the failing to prepare, but I used it so much I feel like I did. I found out just for this purpose that Benjamin Franklin is credited for that one. So go Ben. The bottom line is the crisis is going to happen. If you haven't already been through one, there's just no way around it. Somebody in your company is going to make a mistake. Something outside of your control is going to go wrong. I'm going to give you a few examples of things going on right now in the news later today. But regardless, it's going to happen. And so instead of panicking because you didn't have a plan when it came along, we need to get our affairs in order. So I said I was going to talk about the Super Bowl a little bit. I didn't mean to make the colors Eagles and Chiefs, but when we talk about marketing and PR, usually that's the good stuff. Like we're going to go out and tell the positive story of who you are, who your company is, who your CEO is, things that you did charitably in your communities, the great employees that you have. That's the fun stuff. No one really ever wants to have to think about crisis communications, the sort of dark side of what we do in PR, because you're on defense and you're on defense the whole time, even when we're being aggressive and we talk about being offensive, it's still because we're on defense and we have to be more aggressive. We even saw last night that there's little doubt the Kansas City Chiefs came into that game with a plan. So even when you have a plan, the Philadelphia Eagles defensive line thought, oh, I'm going to disrupt that. And the Philadelphia Eagles defensive line are sometimes just influencers online. Sometimes it's a grumpy ex-employee. Sometimes it's because your company had a tragic accident on a work site. Like a million things can happen. They're going to disrupt your happy PR. And I just threw a couple things on here, even just in the last few days that have come up during Super Bowl week. The NFL is going to try to be doing all the positive, happy talk leading up to the Super Bowl. But here on the left side, you can see somebody wasn't very happy and leaked a batch of emails about how the New Orleans Saints communications team was close to the Archdiocese of New Orleans. And going back a few years, they got involved in trying to help the Archdiocese beat back stories and work on that issue to defend the Archdiocese against all the sexual assault claims. And their initial comments on this thing were, we didn't really get that involved. We didn't really do a whole lot. Well, they violated one of the main things we'll talk about later is they weren't honest about it. And somebody that wasn't happy about it leaked at least, I think, 30 emails that showed how in depth they were involved in trying to offer essentially free advice to the Archdiocese. And then we have what I call spillover effect. I mean, you can argue that Roger Goodell is where the buck stops in the NFL, but he doesn't own that team. He doesn't run that team. So he gets headlines like the ones that you see here, which are the spillover onto him. Now, he chose not to get involved and talk about it. He had a lot of positive things they could be talking about this week. The Luka Doncic trade in the NBA probably helped as well. On the right side, I note this one because we know that President Trump is on offense all the time. There's a part of the federal government that I bet you 99% of America didn't know existed until last week, the USAID. Part of what was in there were, well, to me, it looks like legitimate payments for news services from like the New York Times and Politico. The equivalent of that would be like your organizations will probably pay for the Detroit News or Free Press or MERS or Gongwer in Lansing. Politico came back, and I don't know if they thought that maybe this thing will blow over because Trump will go on to 6 more things. But they had this really, in my eyes, lame thing. They did this note to readers to explain that they're just a legitimate business. They didn't do a whole lot to push back, but they did try to push back a little bit. So these things are swirling around us all the time. I also like to think about crisis communications as an emotional thing. And that may seem weird. Like sometimes I think I've earned my psychology degree in the time that I've been in this job and these jobs that I've had. And on the left are a few of the standard like stages of grief: denial, anger, depression, acceptance. They match up pretty good with the emotional stages of dealing with a communications crisis, except for a couple other ones. You know, at first, sometimes the denial, you'll know a local reporter calls in and has got some complaint about something they want to talk about, and you're like, oh, that guy's always out to get us. I don't have to talk to them. Nobody reads the local newspaper anymore. Forget that. Well, then the story runs and it's bad and it doesn't look good. And now some people on social media are sending it around, or your employees are asking, what's the deal with this? So now you're getting mad. You're like, what the heck is going on here? Why did they do this to us? This whole time the clock is ticking and you're not doing anything. And then you get so many complaints, you just start getting depressed about it. You're like, oh my gosh, fine, this is terrible. I guess we should do something. Holy cow, we better act. And that's when the panic and the call comes to a PR firm like ours. And I should say I'm happy to get it because I am. I'm a small business person, like I mentioned, but it could be slightly less emotional. I mean, I spend a lot of time comforting, cajoling, supporting. Sometimes you have to give tough love. There's a lot of emotional stuff involved here, and we need to boil it down more to a science, like I'll talk about later. So that's why I say, like, the dirty secret about, a dirty secret anyway, about crisis comms is that many firms fail to do this because they think it's bad karma to consider that something could go wrong. They don't want to have to consider that. They don't want a team in a place for that kind of that sense of bad feelings. If there's lawyers on here, I love you. I pay lawyers every day. They have a lot of lawyers that are trying to limit their liability. That is their job, and I'm glad they're there to do it. I worked in the Attorney General's office twice. I worked with nothing but lawyers. They do their job, but there has to be a counterbalancing effect for what needs to be said and what's the right thing to do. It doesn't necessarily always expose you to more liability, and no attorney, God love them all, because I do, is going to sit there and try to say, well, I didn't mention the possibility of this liability because of X, Y, and Z. That's what they're going to do. It's their job. But it oftentimes has a tendency to clamp a company up, and only after they take a full-on beating do they go, okay, my God, all right, I got it, but I've got to do something about this. Sometimes the C-suite has a culture of wanting to like operate under the radar. I find that's especially true in the B2B world. Like you don't, all your jobs are coming internally, all your work is coming internally. Everybody is making money and getting paid and going on vacation, having a good work environment, and they don't want to be above the radar. They don't want to be noticed, so they don't even do this. A lot of these companies, shockingly to me, don't even have a communications person inside their company. That could be for financial reasons. I'm not here to attack anybody today, but that's a huge mistake. Then if they do have a comm shop, they only think of it, when I say comm shop, I'm using lingo as communications. They only think of it in terms of the happy talk. They're going to do an internal newsletter. They're going to put something great about how it's Earth Day on our social media page, but they're kept in the dark. They're not part of the C-suite level information that's going on at a company. And so they can't really do anything to help you. And frankly, when they're treated like that, why would they stick their neck out to speak truth to power? And sometimes, so overall, these companies are just sort of afraid to touch or deal with any of these things. And this is where speed kills, because your crisis, when it happens, whether you caused it or it's misinformation or whatever, it's going to move forward at its own pace. And you see those phones in the background right there, they are hungry. They want more information. Somebody wants to swipe to the next fun thing to read. Every media company or influencer or social media site, they all want to get clicks. They've got to sell their ads. So your crisis is going to move faster than you would like it to be. That means you are going to have to move faster than you are comfortable with. And that's often quite impossible or very painful when you don't have a plan in place and you don't have people who are dedicated to the task. So you really got to ask yourself, if we've got plans for financial downturns, if we have plans to run fiscal audits, if we have annual safety planning to know how to get out of the building when there's an accident, or whether we have to wear a bright orange vest or a air monitor on our shirt or a hard hat on our head, why don't we also have the communications and the crisis communications built into what we do to protect our company? Because like we talked about, the main thing here is to protect our reputation. So I could give you a lot of different communication steps, but since we're on Zoom and since we have a limited amount of time, I'm going to go over these 6 steps that I think are pretty useful when you're starting to think about what to do here. The first one, I didn't mean to have 4 R's, but I do: respond, research, react, and refine. We'll go over that. You got to appoint a leader. You have to build a team around that leader. You have to have a monitoring and reporting system as far as outside information is going and inside information in your company. We can't be stuck with silos, and we don't have to be caught off guard. We have to know who the outside influencers are, and we have to get to know them. That can be starting with your local media. I'll go through all that stuff, and it can go all the way out to some influencer on social media. And then lastly, we'll talk about, after all that planning, the messaging part. I talked about the preparing is the science. The preparing of putting together the team and having the operation in place is the science, and that should make you calmer. The responding is an art, and a lot of people don't like hearing that. They're like, I want the response to be a science also. I've seen people say, we can pre-write press releases for every possible scenario, and every time I get into that situation, we toss that stuff out the window, because you can't predict the details or what are going to happen, and you have to start being creative and have strategies. So responding and messaging is not a science, it's an art. So on step number 1, research, respond, react, refine. If you just want to grasp this before you look at this later, it's about what actually happens if it's today, it's Monday, it's the day after the Super Bowl, I've got a headache, I didn't get my free Starbucks. A call comes in through the front desk, they bring it in, but it's like, I've got my staff meeting for the week, I've got to go and handle a crisis with an HR problem, whatever. This thing comes in and we've got to respond to it. And the thing that I learned working for a lot of politicians is they hated it when there was so-and-so couldn't be caught for, or couldn't be reached for comment. Company X couldn't be reached for comment. That looks like you're hiding. So we have to be prepared to be in a place where if something's significant, we acknowledge it, we're aware of the issue, and we're monitoring it. We want that to be out there in the first round of stories, even if we're going to hold off and work through our whole process over a day or a week, depending on the kind of time we have. It's usually not a week to come up with a fuller answer. We've got to be out there right away. Like when the airplane crash happened in Washington, you needed to see the airline, you needed to see the Department of Transportation. You need to see people come out and say, we're aware of this thing. I'm not just watching it, circle around the news on Twitter and X.com. The people responsible actually said something. To the research phase, that's when your crisis team has to get together immediately. They have to be able to gather all the facts, start the preparation process, start to figure out what is going on and what else can we say in sort of stage 2. Then we have to react. And that's where your company sometimes at first is just saying, we have empathy for what's happened. There's a public safety issue because we had an accident on our site, or we had a train derailment, or we had an employee that did something terrible on their off day. Whatever it is, we got to get to where we're taking action, saying we're taking these steps to either further investigate what happened, we're taking these steps to make changes right now as to what's happening. We're going to come back to you. We don't have to give an answer to solve everything, but when we get to the react part, we're doing things to show that we're taking care of the situation, or we're going to be doing things to slap it down and saying it's totally false, it's wrong, here's why it's wrong. We're going to have a press conference and lay all this stuff out. We're going to have a social media plan that cranks out the facts of why it's wrong. That react stage will only come after we have time to do some significant planning and work, even if it's done in a very intense, short fashion. And then lastly, that's why I use a circle on this thing and not a line. It's never over. So I told you I try to be optimistic today, but these things are never over. So from one angle, the refinement is after we get through this first initial stage of, yeah, I know, I'm aware of this, I'm doing something. We do our research, we talk to our lawyers, we talk to our internal team, I'll go over next. And we say, okay, here's the things we can say, here's the things we have to do in the immediacy, here's some of the things we're starting to think about. We have to go back and refine our messaging. And it doesn't mean we changed our messaging. More information became available, more planning came available. We found out something different about the initial accusation or problem, and we refine. The second track for that is if this thing sort of does come to an end, we need to look back and refine how our crisis team operated and functioned in our operations, and what do we need to do differently next time to be even calmer because we've worked our crisis muscles a little bit more. 2, I talk about a crisis team next, but there has to be somebody in charge. I find quite often that once I get hired into a private company who needs help with something like this, I will become the de facto leader because I'm the only one that's willing to speak truth to power, and not in a negative or nasty way. It's better when there's somebody in the company who can do that, because most of the work, the prep work that has to be done, is coming within your own company. And if you have just say you have a communications team, but you have somebody who is cranking out the happy talk and that's all the C-suite cares about, when that person comes running into your office with their hair on fire, they don't always get taken seriously, and it's not their fault. It's because somebody wasn't put in a place to say, when there's an emergency, I can make things happen. So a committee will not be able to lead your crisis, even though you will have a team. You need to have somebody who can pick up the phone and call someone else at 2 in the morning, one of the engineers or something, go, all right, X is happening, I need to know Y, Z, I need to have other information at hand so we can have a 7 a.m. Zoom and start going over this stuff so we can start figuring out what our initial reaction will be. You have to have the authority to gather that data from other sources within the company. So when you call, those people know I've got to respond to this person. This isn't somebody that I don't have to respond to. And like I talked about, that speaking truth to power. Boy, it's terrible. Like when you have an emergency at your company, it's not your fault. And then you have to go in and your C-suite is occupied on some really important things to make sure the company is actually growing and moving toward its financial goals every year. And you roll in to disrupt everything. Some people don't want to do that. They don't want to stick their necks out for that because it's going to affect how their bosses look at them. They're going to think, oh gosh, I could lose my job over this. You got to have somebody inside who has the ability to do this stuff. And it can't be the CEO, frankly, or somebody like that. They've got too much to do. It's got to be somebody high up, but not always at the top. So step 3, you've got to build that communications team, and this group's got to meet regularly. They have to know they're charged with this task. They have to come through, whether they're gonna, in the absence of crises, they're gonna meet at least once a month or every quarter, whatever you determine that you have the bandwidth to do. You got to have that team. They got to know they're part of this, because when that call does come to say we got to have a 7 a.m. Zoom, they got to know they're part of this. They have to have buy-in and know what they're doing. And you want to be able to easily get information. So your in-house comms team, your legal team, look at that. I got legal right at number 2. I still love my lawyers. HR, your government relations and policy people. Perhaps you're a multi-client lobbyist like Melissa. Drag her into that 7 a.m. Zoom call. The front desk. I'll talk about this a little bit more in a bit, but there's some people who don't have the foggiest clue of what's going on at your company because they're not involved in management. Yet they are the front door to crises showing up at your doorstep, and they need to know what to do and know how to recognize something that's important. You're going to have some kind of lead spokesperson. A lot of times that can be a CEO, but again, the CEO has a lot on their plate. And so it may be somebody totally different in your company. It just has to be somebody we determine as a team can handle this, who can be focused on it, who becomes the expert on whatever the crisis is and knows the talking points the team's developed. It can be an outside PR person if it's really an ugly thing and you just want to move that outside of your day-to-day operations. Not all firms have the resources to do that. And you need to have, I generally believe once that happens, you got to at least have an outside PR consultant who is free to sort of speak their mind and spot things outside of your operations that you might not see from inside, even if they're just on a general consulting contract to show up at these meetings whenever they're scheduled. This team knows you best. There's plenty of companies that silo information. There's plenty of reasons why information needs to be siloed, but the more it is, the less likely it is that this crisis team can do anything for you. So this team's got to be the people that know you best. That means you may need to educate them. They have to be trusted with your key information ahead of time, because we don't need to let every red flag turn into a crisis on the outside. We can spot crises and stop them from the inside. They need to be able to gather data and see things, and they need to, in whatever way that you organize it, they need to be able to access the C-suite decision makers in the end. They're going to okay the things that are said and done. So number 4, to create a monitoring or reporting system. This is really 2 things. First, I'm going to mention the monitoring part. If you have a good communications team and they have enough bandwidth, they're going to be out there watching what's in the news every day. They're going to have your Google searches set up. They're going to be trying to watch what would be identified as key influencing social media, things like that. But really, your firm also can buy into or buy their own data monitoring that searches and sends you reports constantly about chatter online about your company or your industry all the time. That can get expensive, but that's the monitoring part. But I'm going to talk first about that front desk part. Reporters still call front desks, and in part that is because many company websites simply want to limit the ability to either have bots go through their website and gather all their data. They don't want to put the phone numbers of individual folks at your company online. There are far more websites that only have a fill out a form to contact me than have here's everybody's phone number and here's how to get a hold of them. And I understand that, but that means, especially if your company is cautious with its outside contact, and your websites don't list here's who you can call or email to get a hold of for a communications issue or something like that, the stuff's going to show up at what I would call your quote front desk. So it's literally the person answering the calls at the front desk. They need to know how to identify things that are important like that and how to get them to the right people and jump up and down later if nobody responded to them. That also applies to your social media, like your direct message inboxes and your general email boxes, because many times I've had clients forward me an email or a DM inside a company social media page that had been sitting there even for 24 hours. Or if it went in on Friday, they didn't see it until Monday afternoon because no one was regularly checking those things. That's your front entry point. That is when the clock starts ticking for your ability for your crisis team to actually do something. So here it's your front desk, it's your paid or in-house monitoring that you do, getting all that into your comm shop, getting all that to your crisis leader when something's starting to boil up so that your team can come up with recommendations and go to your C-suite as soon as possible. Having that chain of information flow actually spelled out in your plan, I find is super important. It's particularly bad like when you know something bad is happening and you're bracing yourself for the hit and you don't even want to upset the employees, and so nobody tells the front desk. The worst is when a TV camera comes trucking through the front door and the poor front desk person's like, oh my goodness, I just watched the Super Bowl last night and I didn't get my free coffee. I'm not ready for this. I don't know what to do with this. And that's the worst way to have to respond to the media overall. You want to be able to create some time. So creating a monitoring and reporting system is super, super important. I'm going to go over internal and external monitoring briefly. The internal monitoring is where we have a shot, especially at identifying potential weaknesses and trying to take care of them before they become a problem. You can do that internally if you have the right staff or comms team, or if you can build the right crisis team inside your office to look through all your social media. Are there comments brewing on your social media that are bad, that could get ugly? You need to come up with a different policy on what you're allowing to be commented on. Did somebody in the social media team post something thinking they're on their private account, but they were really on the company account and no one's noticed it yet? Okay, we can do something about that, but only if you look first, not if a client, a customer, a cranky employee spots that stuff and feeds it to a reporter or an influencer. You can even hire PR firms, you can hire legal firms to look through all these things and tell you about this stuff. You're going to know internally the things that could go public at some point, like emergency issues, financial, ethical, deaths that happen internally in your company. You got to activate the crisis PR team. Safety, environmental issues. There's a million things that you know that are brewing and coming that you're going to like try to like keep information flow really tight on. You got to know when to ring the bell and let your comms team basically audit through what are all those potential things so we can prepare to handle them when they come, or even be on offense in a defensive way to handle it ourselves publicly before someone else hits us with it. I mean, it goes all the way down to somebody in your company or your C-suite could have personal issues that they got arrested for DUI and your team knows it and you're just hoping it doesn't go anywhere. Your crisis team needs to know that stuff. They need to be able to meet and go through and prepare and have the answers ready, because sure enough, when that media call comes, because a police officer, a court clerk, it happens all the time. Court clerk will say, oh, I recognize bigwig so-and-so at company Y. I'm going to go and leak that to my favorite reporter at Channel 4. Stuff like that happens constantly. You guys will know the stuff internally and your team can audit to do that. You can also do, obviously, I think I'm a strong believer in it, your external monitoring I talked about on the info flow area. Your comms team or an outside PR firm or a paid digital service needs to be monitoring what's going on with the name of your company, with the name of your maybe C-suite leadership. They need to be looking for these things that are floating around out there. Your employees are an excellent network because they have their own lives and they're online all the time. And if they are running across an influencer website or their neighborhood page where someone's complaining about company X, they can feed that information back. You have to help them know where to take it so that something can be done about it. You're going to have angry ex-employees are floating around out there. Even if they signed a confidentiality agreement, it doesn't mean they can't leak something and try to cause you problems. You may have upset customers that you don't realize are upset, or you do know they're upset. Your lawyers know there's ongoing litigation that are sitting in a court somewhere that a reporter hasn't found yet, but your crisis team needs to be able to know about that. And then we see this all the time now. The protest movements in your industry can pop up at any given time. If you're seeing someone else getting protested that's in the same realm or industry that you're in, you need to be able to track that, put it as part of your crisis comms review plan and be ready for that. There's no reason to not be ready for something. And if it never happens, great. 6, you need to know who the outside influencers are and you need to get to know them. You can't let a crisis be the first time you talk to a reporter on your beat. I'm just going to make this up. If you're on a environmental issue and there's an environmental reporter for the Grand Rapids Press or the Detroit News, and they typically write about this stuff. If I go back to the beginning, your company's mentality generally is to think, I don't want to be above the radar. I don't want to stick my head above the ground. I don't want to be seen. That's a risky strategy. So it'd be much better to be able to start to get to know over coffee. Your comms people especially should be able to start to say, hey, I'd like to meet you. Can we get lunch? And start to meet these reporters. You establish some kind of relationship. You get a feel for what their personality is like, because yes, reporting and journalism has ethical standards, but yes, we also know they are human beings, and so they may have certain beefs with things, but they also are writing, and especially if they're writing on a particular industry, you know that they're going to be writing about things that you deal with. So build that up in your local news and print media, your local morning show. I mean, I'm always in favor of having it on your CEO and your leadership or your comms people on local shows all the time. When you have positive stuff, you did a charitable contribution, you're building up goodwill in the community. You get to know those people by doing that positive stuff. I talked about the beat reporters in your industry. It may be more like statewide publications, like a Crain's Detroit Business or a Crain's Grand Rapids Business, or a national or regional kind of publication. You need to get to know the folks that are there and have media lists of all these people so you know how to get a hold of them when you need to. Lastly, I'll mention on this page, it's really important to build up a group of stakeholders and third-party validators, and those may be one and the same. They can be your association, like the association that you're working with today if you're an engineer. That association can at times come in and help you solve an issue or handle a problem, particularly with the expertise they carry, because reporters are often going to be looking for, well, okay, there's crisis X happening right now. What's the industry standard? What usually happens? Did they do everything they were supposed to do? You want to have some people out there, academics at universities in Michigan who work in the field you're in, who should know like who you are and what you do, and that when there's a problem, you can refer reporters to those people. You're also going to want stakeholders are your employees. And I talked about that earlier, that their reach on social media and their ability to have friends and family say supportive comments or to knock down misinformation online. You need to think through and build your network of those folks so that when a crisis happens, you have independent stakeholders you can go to. You're going to have supportive stakeholders like your association that you can go to, your employees, and even just people who are out in the community that will potentially step up and say something positive about you or help push back on misinformation. You want to have lists of those people built up and maintain your relationships with them. So when you do get into a problem, you have someone else speaking out on your behalf besides you. So lastly, I want to talk through number 6 on messaging. I talked about this at the beginning. Preparing is a science, responding is an art. So the science is going through all the mechanizations and the processes I talked about. Responding is an art. It's the messages and the tactics, and you're gonna have to be creative when you're doing those things. And once we've gathered the facts and identified who's affected, we've issued our short-term acknowledgement of what's going on, that's when we have to hurry up and develop the rest of our messaging strategy. And it's going to depend on a lot of things. And so I call it an art because it's going to be created on the fly with your team, and ideally with an outside person who has outside perspective from a PR firm or your law firm or whatever, but I prefer the PR side to develop the kind of comments and communications we're going to have. We've got to have a few basics in there all the time, even if we're not spilling our guts right away. We've got to have as much transparency as we can to build trust. We've got to have tone of empathy and reassurance when that's necessary, especially when it's clear we did something wrong. And this is an effort to gain or regain your trustworthiness through your response. You may have lost in trust with what happened with the crisis. You can regain it by being upfront and answering right away, by being transparent to the extent we can be, even if it's over time as things progress, of having the right tone of empathy and reassurance. That goes a long way too when you pick your PR face of this thing, what kind of personality they have and what kind of tone they carry when talking about these things. But this is an art, and this is where it's incredibly vital to have your outside PR team, your internal comms team already up to speed on what your crisis plan is and developing talking points for each of these things that sneak past the lawyers. There's a lot of tactics that we use. I'm just going to list a few of them here. We're going to do spokesperson or CEO media interviews all across local, regional, or national media, depending on what the level of the crisis is. We need to be able to activate those third-party validators and influencers who might be on our side to help us with those things. We got to get them information. Our company needs to be able to put out like what's referred to as social proof posts on social media, the factual data about a situation, either progress points in an unfolding crisis or facts when it's misinformation that you're battling against, and try to help frame that debate. We can have op-eds and letters to the editor, either from your leadership or from your employees and your employees' families into newspapers if it's going to be a long-running situation. And then there's plenty of times where paid digital advertising needs to be put into place because it's the only way to truly get into the community and lay out what the facts and the positive things are about what your company does. Those are just a handful of the tactics we would use, and they're not guaranteed, so I don't call that a science. I'll call that an art. I just wanted to touch base on misinformation. I get asked about this a lot. If we think that misinformation spiraling on the internet is going to stop, it's not. It's just going to be going faster all the time. The only plus to it may be that it may blow over when the next information thing happens to someone else. But this is where the monitoring has to come in hardcore. We really can't be in a position where we're not watching or not listening to what's going on out there, because maybe it's about someone else in our industry, then it's a brush fire that we can prepare for more on our time frame. It's if it starts to be about us, we maybe can do something about it before it turns into wildfire and turns into Pacific Palisades. That our team, because they were monitoring, because we already had a process and a crisis communications team in place, we can do something to tamp that down before it gets out of control. When there's misinformation, we have to consider internally contacting the actual source that's putting it out to try to give them the facts. If they're just going to be against us because they already hate us, or they're getting paid, or whatever it is they're doing, they like to create clicks for themselves, we got to go to the other stakeholders around them in that universe and give them the facts and try to push that out there. That's our responsibility, to get that information out there. I can't stop coming back to your entire team, your staff. You got to include them, and they are going to be out there talking to their friends, to their neighbors. They're going to be posting online. Their family and their friends may want to do things that help support you and your company, because that's where their friends and family are employed. Your customers are a key role here too, in communicating with them and letting them know you've got things under control. You're protecting your reputation and your reputation for competence, but they become mouthpieces too for you, and that's really important. It's a more sensitive, cautious step to trying to turn them into validators for you, but if they're good customers and you've been good to them, you should have some decent ability to do that. Now I want to make sure we leave time for questions. And of course, this picture disappeared for the second time on me. I'm going to walk through something that's going on right now, particularly if you're from Southeast Michigan, or you like to frequent Detroit sporting events, and you do one of the famous things, which is to go one of the Coney Islands, Lafayette or American Coney Island, before you go to see the Tigers or the Red Wings or the Lions or the Pistons, or all of them. I have to admit, I've always been a Lafayette person in that battle. I have nothing against either one, and my doctor doesn't let me eat chili dogs anymore anyway, but I love all of them. I want them to all succeed and thrive. It's a tourism thing. It's like part of the soul and reputation of the city. And so like what's going on right now there is a true crisis, and it's a tragedy, and hopefully they can find their way through it. But, responding is an art form. So here, I talked earlier about how we don't like to get into initial stories where we don't respond to a media call. We don't respond and say, we're working on this, or we understand it's, I'll get back to you. You want to be in every story where you're on top of this. That's important to establishing your credibility when you do have a solution, so you don't look like you're just backing into that solution. So the picture here was the headline about how Lafayette Coney Island had their second rat infestation in 2 years. So that's a huge problem in itself, that it repeated, right? I'm not passing judgment on any of this stuff. I love them all. We're just talking about something that's relatable, so and I hope they all recover. So hopefully I've covered my bases there enough. But here in this first story in Crain's Detroit Business, there's a million reasons why they didn't respond, but right away, they didn't respond immediately to a request. So that's not so great, but they did move pretty fast. So within the same day, they stepped up to say they're voluntarily closing to address the rodent issue. That's good. Look at them. They are in front of their issue now. So earlier in the day, they didn't know what to say. They weren't prepared because they're a Coney Island. They didn't have a crisis teams in place. You can't necessarily blame them. But here, not only did they react and say, we're going to close and start cleaning and solve this problem, but they took the step of inviting Channel 7 WXYZ inside to watch them cleaning. That gave them what we would call B-roll footage. They didn't speak on camera, but B-roll footage of the workers going through this place from top to bottom, cleaning. That's the first step in trying to recover from this situation. And they let the TV cameras come in. There's a lot of lawyers out there that wouldn't want to let that happen. I'm not just ripping on lawyers, but that's part of the situation. There's a lot of owners that are like, oh my gosh, we're going to look terrible no matter what we do. So I'm going to put paper over the doors and not talk to anybody. That would be a bad idea. Here, Lafayette responded. They brought cameras inside and they showed them working to clean and take care of what's going on. So it's clear they know there's a problem and they're doing something about it. Now I'm going to talk over what I call spillover. So at the beginning, we talked about how Roger Goodell and the NFL is taking spillover heat from what somebody did in New Orleans. Here, part of the exciting rivalry between Lafayette and American is that American Coney is right next door. And clearly by what they decided to do was that they felt they were taking spillover negativity to their own restaurant business. And they felt that they had to do a press conference to push back and say that they are all good, that they're clean, that they handle things the way they handle. You can tell she said buy a broom. She was very upset, the owner of American. Um, they clearly have a rivalry. There was no love lost there, but she had to call a press conference to clear the air that they are all good in their eyes because they were taking impact to their business. So you may need to have a crisis response based on what I refer to as a spillover situation, where you're like, God, that has nothing to do with me. I don't want my name associated with that. But when in reality, your name is getting associated with it because your building's next door, or you are partners with that business, or you're in the same city or town, or whatever it is, you have to consider being preemptive to avoid a spillover mess getting onto you. And that's what American Coney attempted to do here. I'm not sure why that picture didn't show up again, but I had the headline there. So I apologize for that. But I say at the top, we're going to refine and respond again. So that's part of the 4 R's. So Lafayette already responded. They brought cameras in there. Then they took this attack from their neighbor. That would be hard to go to work the next day when you got your neighbors doing press conferences against you. But, she was in the right, I think, because she felt like she had to speak up for herself. She was probably seeing the financial impact of what was happening there, the questions. How is it possible that your business is clean when theirs isn't, and you share a wall? So there was a refinement to the messaging by Lafayette. They came back. They didn't go quiet. They came back and said, they've been diligent in doing this. They came out and showed that they hired a pest control operation. They showed the forms that were signed off on, that everything was clean and good, that they had passed rodent inspections in the previous weeks or months. So they had been on this since their last time. That was smart. Maybe they could have brought this out right on the first response, but what they did is their comp saying they clearly at least brought somebody in. They refined what they did from their first response and added on again. And then here they refined a second time. And here they said, wait a second. Detroit has a rodent problem. All big cities have rodent problems. This isn't our fault that this is happening. The city needs to step in. So whether you agree with it or not, you can see that they took another step to refine their message and add another finger pointing to say, I'm taking care of my business. Now the city needs to help us, all restaurants, not just ours, clean up downtown because they're going to claim that they have this problem. I don't think the city responded to that in particular. But you can see, even in this situation where it's a tragedy for all involved, because they're both such, usually happy institutions, when you're going to Detroit and you go to these places, it's because you're with your friends, your buddies, your family, you're going to have a good time. They have had to go into the back and forth here, and it's not done because Lafayette is not reopened yet. And of course, there'll be another round of media stories. We'll be interested to see if the spillover side decides they have to talk about it again, if the restaurant decides it has to talk about it again, which you would think they're going to, because they're going to want to say we have a clean bill of health. We're going to keep moving forward, and they're going to have probably I would advise them to have some really happy open houses where all their true diehard supporters show up, come back in, everybody's eating and happy again, and try to move on. But these things can pop up in a moment's notice. This happened over the course, I think of it broke on a Friday, like a week ago, and the attack press conferences coming back on them from their neighbors were happening by Monday. So you can see how fast that was happening in real time, and that can happen to you. So if your team is already built out, if there's already a monitoring process in place, if people have already done internal reviews of what's happening and what your potential weak spots are, you don't have to panic because you'll know what to do, even if we need to tweak the final messaging as an art form. So I'll conclude here by saying, I love my analogies. I said, you can't treat emergency comms like calling a plumber. And there's plenty of companies who call and pay a lot of money because they don't have a plan in place, or they don't even have a comms person in place that can handle these things. If the pipe leaks, it's already causing water damage. So a PR team is not like a movie. We can't just shut this stuff off. But even once we do stop the leak after a few days, that water damage that's been flowing all over your business, so to speak, already has created damage that we're going to have to push back from. So you want to, timing wise, be able to have your team in place so we do as little water damage as possible. You want to have your plumber on site. And when we have that plan in place, we simply don't have to panic as much. It doesn't mean we won't be stressed out. It doesn't mean you won't need me to be a psychologist to get through it, but we can be in a better place. And when we do all this effort for a lot of other things like financial audits, safety planning, all these other things that we do. In this modern media environment, we have to do that for crisis communications as well. So like Troy mentioned before, for those of you that are going to be using this for your CEUS credit, here is the QR code right now. We'll be able to send that around. There's also a code word here too. And right now I'll try to leave that on the screen for a minute. I can open it back up if there are any questions from the Kelly Cawthorn side.
This time, there doesn't appear to be any questions, John.
All right. Well, that either means everyone's asleep or we did a good job. Like I said at the beginning, especially for those of you in ACEC, if you have other questions or you just want to talk things through, you want to pitch some ideas to me, I'm more than happy to talk to you all because of the resources that ACEC put into this effort today. So just make sure you buzz Troy and talk to me. And if anybody from Melissa's side also has any questions or comments, I'm more than happy to talk with you as a follow-up on that as well.
Thank you very much, John. We greatly appreciate that, and we greatly appreciate all the information that you provided and the timely and relative examples. So it was a great presentation. I know I learned a lot, and I hope that everyone that joined us learned as much as I did. So thank you again for agreeing to do this for Melissa and I and coming on today. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, John. As always, your information is always so helpful, and we have relied on you many times, and we really appreciate everything you always share. Your counsel has always been terrific. So if you ever need services, Harbor Strategic Public Affairs is the place we call at Kelly Cawthorn. Always, it's a great place.
Thank
So
you.
definitely reach out to John. But on behalf of Kelly Cawthorn and ACEC Michigan, thank you for joining us today. And please join us again on Friday as we have the State Budget Director, Jen Flood, giving an overview of the governor's executive budget recommendation at noon this Friday, February 14th, Valentine's Day. So look forward to seeing everyone then. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.